another barren winter transfer window for Newcastle. What's going on? How's it, everybody? Welcome back to another video. A couple of things to get through in this video. We're going to surmise and talk about the defeat and the way Newcastle capitulated at Liverpool. We've got to talk about the winter transfer window and also the saga about Sandro Tonali and his agent potentially offering him up to Arsenal. And we'll round up previewing the Carabao Cup away at Man City at the Etihad. So let's start and talk about the winter transfer window. Newcastle have not added any significant names onto the roster. Should we be surprised or should we have seen this coming? Newcastle don't tend to bring any significant names in the winter. This is the fourth winter in a row. We made no signings this season. In the winter of 2025, we made no signings. Last winter, we made no signings when we sold Almiron. Got to go back to 2022 when Newcastle brought in Anthony Gordon for an initial 45 million from Everton. The Newcastle fan base seems to be really disappointed. Personally, I am too. We are taking a huge risk going into the season. We've never played as many games as we will play in this season. Now, part of that is due to our success in the Champions League, the fact that we've made it through to the playoffs. The other reason is because we've made it far in the Carabao Cup and we've got an FA Cup tie away at Villa in a couple of weeks, and we're still fighting to get a place in Europe in the Premier League. We could argue all day where the priority should lie. Should we be chasing the cash of the Champions League? Should we be prioritizing the bread and butter, which is the Premier League? Should we be ditching the FA Cup, for example? I don't think Newcastle have the squad, and I've said this before, to compete in 4 different competitions. The risk we take, and Eddie Howe mentioned it today in his press conference, is that a certain area of the pitch, whether it be the attack, the midfield, or the defense, has multiple injuries. This season, it seems to be our defense. Malik Chow has started practically every single game. He looks absolutely knackered. We've only got one real left back at the club, which is Lewis Hall. Tino's had his injury worries. Trippier's not getting any younger. Botman, Byrne, and Shaw have all had injuries. So the biggest area which Newcastle should have covered is its central defence. Is there any player out there that immediately stands out, which Newcastle could have gone and done something? I really don't understand why we didn't loan somebody in. You can't tell me there's not a player at a top club in Europe who's struggling to break into the team and maybe wants to prove himself and earn a World Cup spot somewhere that Newcastle could have loaned in. We know that Jamal Lascelles has now left the club after 12 long years at Newcastle. Hats off to Jamal. He stuck with the club when we got relegated, and most of the big names like Wijnaldum, Sissoko, etc. all decided to bail and didn't want to play in the Championship. Fair enough. But Lascelles was the guy who stayed behind. He led us through to the Championship all the way to the Champions League, and obviously was part of the trophy lift when Newcastle won the Carabao Cup last season. The only one you think maybe Newcastle missed out locally in the Premier League was Disasi, who went to West Ham. I do question Ross Wilson, who's the sporting director. He joined on the 4th of September. Where is this guy's contacts? Where's his scouting network? Where is a young 21-year-old up-and-coming player who is dying for first-team football, or at least to be on the bench somewhere that Newcastle could have gone in? It really does make me worried about Newcastle's pull in terms of getting players through the door. You can't tell me it was a finance thing. Eddie screamed about the finances and they were under PSR restrictions and blah, blah, blah. We know that's the issue. But we're saving on Jamal Lascelles' money. We specifically chose not to get Target back to the club. When Eddie Howe was asked about that, he specifically said it's not just a case of us pulling a player. We have to respect the player's wishes. So very interesting that Target doesn't even want to come back. He doesn't want to be on the bench and try and fight for his spot against Lewis Hall. Lewis Hall is always going to be first choice. But let's think about this. Can Lewis Hall play every single game between now and the end of the season, including Champions League, League Cups, FA Cups? No chance. The other bombshell or grenade we need to talk about is that on the last day of the window, news broke out in Sky Germany that apparently Sandro Tonali's agent had offered him up to Arsenal. Arsenal were obviously looking for a replacement due to Mikael Mourinho's injury. We all remember that guy got homesick and didn't like it at Newcastle and left to go back to Spain and then came back to England. He obviously got sick of being at home, so he wanted to come back to England. There's 2 things which are screaming out here. Number 1 is that there's no smoke without fire. It's highly unlikely that Sandro Tonali's agent would have gone and spoken to Arsenal without Sandro Tonali knowing about it or approving it, or at least stoking the fire. Let's be honest, the guy doesn't seem happy. He doesn't come across as a laughy, jokey type character. but you can tell in the way he plays in his football, he just doesn't seem happy. His performances have not been anywhere near what they were last season. And all Newcastle fans are having deja vu about how the whole Alexander Isak saga played out. The big difference here is that that was right at the beginning of the season. The Sandro Tonali thing was right on the last day of the transfer window. I think had this happened at the beginning of the window, I honestly think that Sandro Tonali would be an Arsenal player now, and Newcastle will be scrambling around, overpaying, trying to replace him somehow. We need to come to terms with the fact that if we don't get Champions League, the likes of Livramento, I would say Lewis Hall even, I don't know about Bruno. I think he'll stick around, but Sandro Tonali definitely maybe feels like he owes a little bit to the club because we stuck with him during that 10-month ban. He actually did extend his contract with the club during that ban as a bit of a way of saying thank you for sticking with it. But we all know Isak had years on his contract, and that doesn't really mean anything. And listen to me, Newcastle set a precedent in the summer that we all knew was going to come back and bite us in the arse. The same thing happened with Alexander Isak. When he down tools, the club bent over and gave that prick exactly what he wanted, which was a move to Liverpool. I did say Karma was a bitch. I did say he needs to remember the way he acts. And hey ho, I'm not saying there's anything to do with the way he broke his leg a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm never going to be happy and say, oh, thank goodness that's payback when a player breaks his leg and gets injured. But life and karma does have a way of kicking you in the backside when you've been an arsehole. I'm going to talk about Isak and the Liverpool game in a second, but let's just finish up the Sandro Tonali thing. 100% there's no smoke without fire. 100% I don't think he will be a Newcastle player in the summer. The way I see it, there's either two options. Either you start looking for his replacement and getting the replacement ready now, and don't wait until he really throws his toys out the cot the way that Isak did, and then we're playing catch up again in the summer window. It's going to be an absolute nightmare to get hold of players because most of the players who are of any quality are going to be away in the US at the World Cup. So get that ready now. If Sandro Tonali wants to leave, get a replacement ready now. Ross Wilson, start doing your job and earning your money and going to find a replacement for Sandro Tonali. You should be doing that anyway. Even if the player wants to stay, you have to have these contingencies. So we have to be prepared for the likes of Livramento. Where's our next right back coming from? Where's our next left back coming from? If we get an insane offer for Lewis Hall, he is an outstanding player. He's got unbelievable skill and talent. The other alternative, which is what Newcastle should have done, in my opinion, in the Alexander Isak saga, is that you say, no, you're not going anywhere. Because the big issue was, and I said this the day Newcastle decided to let Isak go, was that decision was going to come around and bite us in the backside. It showed the other players, the likes of Gordon, the likes of Tonali, who, let's be honest, have never been the same player since Isak left. It showed those players that the club was smaller than one big star player. If Newcastle had sat on their hands and said, you ain't going anywhere, you are staying here, my friend, I guarantee you Isak would have cried for another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. By the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th game, he would have been over it. The guy's moral compass is lost. It's all about who can pay what. As we now know, they had Iketike anyway. And this is a perfect segue into the Liverpool game. Obviously, Newcastle lost away 4-1 at Liverpool. Some fans are saying that the scoreline slightly flattered Liverpool. I don't know. I think it could have been more, to be honest with you. The first 37 minutes were unbelievable. The energy, the intensity. There was a big hoo-ha about our two strikers sitting on the bench, and again, Anthony Gordon starting up front. But it meant Harvey Barnes played in his ideal position on the left wing, and Anthony Elanga got another opportunity to perform on the right wing. He did okay against PSG, but he was not really good on the right wing at Liverpool. I thought Ramsey had another good, solid performance in the midfield. Joe Willock, again, good energy, just that kind of final finesse. That Premier League top 6 quality was not there, but bless him. You can't tell me the guy's not trying his absolute heart out. But we got absolutely exposed down the right. Trippier, we love the guy to death. But the way Liverpool came and swarmed at our defense, I just think the in-game management, from the players themselves, just to say sit. Somebody sit. Just sit. Roy Keane talks about this all the time, about in-game management, about a captain in the center of the midfield, just saying, whoa, hold on. I know we've played a ball over. I know we're on the break, but one of the midfielders has to sit. We almost seemed like schoolboy football that when the ball got kicked forward, everyone just ran forward in the midfield. Now, it's fine if one or two go and join the attack, but I don't see why Tonali specifically couldn't be like a Perlo and just sit in front of our defense and say, hold on, we're not getting caught on the attack here. Everybody tuck in, pull in. For the next 15 minutes, let's ball the hell out of it. Let's pass the ball around. It's 2-1 at half time. 3-1, the game was over. Eddie Howe got absolutely caned for not making substitutes when he should have. Joe Willock was crying to come off. Eventually, we ended the game with 3 strikers on the pitch. I honestly think that was a way of Eddie Howe just giving minutes to guys. I don't think, honestly, he felt that we were going to go and nick a win or nick a goal. The game had long gone by then. The biggest thing for me which came out of the game was 2 things. Number one, Alexander Isak laughing and joking when Liverpool scored. And the second thing was Ekitike blowing bubbles and 3-1ing the Newcastle fans. Now, my initial instinct when I saw that was, you are such scum, my friend. Obviously, tons of players perform well. When they leave a club, they come back, some they score and they don't want to celebrate. This guy Isak is not even on the pitch and he's laughing and celebrating in the dugout behind the substitutes. Well done, Alexander Isak. You are a class individual. We all wish you the best, and we all really hope those toothpick legs stay intact when you come back from injury. Hugo Ekitike, we all know Eddie Howe wanted to sign the guy twice. Once before he even went to PSG, and then the second time when he was at Frankfurt. Now, in my opinion, if you reject me once, I'm not coming back to you. If you don't want to come to Newcastle, I'm not going to ask you twice. You either come the first time, or you can F off. That's the way I see it. The thing which made me the most disappointed was the way in which we responded, or rather did not respond to that. I always think that, David can beat Goliath on any given day. This is the beauty of football. But it didn't come across to me that Newcastle thought that we could actually go and win. First 37 minutes were really, really great. But you tell me that when Anthony Gordon scores that goal, that is a real celebration. It's not. He kind of felt embarrassed. He went like this a little bit to the crowd. You've got to go and give it to them. You've got to go that we are not going anywhere. We've seen Burnley do it. We've seen Sunderland do that at Anfield. The inferiority complex of the team is screaming out so loudly. And a lot of that has to come from the manager. You can imagine Eddie Howe at halftime doing a team talk. He's not going to put the fear of God in you. He's one of those guys who you are scared to disappoint, but you don't fear him. That's the way he comes across. Jose Mourinho, Alex Ferguson, Pep, Klopp, etc. These are guys who think, I'm going to get kicked up the backside if I don't do my job. Eddie Howe's the kind of guy you're going to go, you could have done a bit better, Not all Eddie Howe's fault, not the players' fault. I heard a comment on the True Faith podcast in the summer window when the Isak thing had happened, and one of the guys on there said something which really, really stuck in my head. He said in the beginning of the season, when the shit hits the fan in the middle of this coming season, we all need to remember what has just happened. What has just happened is that we have allowed our best player to leave. We allowed him to leave. We did that without a sporting director. Whose fault is that? Is that Eddie Howe's fault? Is that Trippier's fault? Is that Anthony Elanga's fault? That Newcastle allowed the best player to set the precedent at the club and the culture and the value of the club to say, I am bigger than you. I shouldn't be playing here. I should be playing there. You made promises to me, blah, 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 blah. It's not Eddie Howe's fault. It's not Nick Pope's fault. It's not anybody's fault. But you got to point a finger at Newcastle. And you have to say, you guys did not set us up in the transfer window. You hired Mitchell, who promised our best player he would give him a contract, and you didn't give it to him. You also haven't pulled your finger out to build a new bloody stadium. You are dragging your feet on the training ground. There's no restriction on a stadium. There's no restriction on a training ground. We have the ability to do things. We can do things. Build the infrastructure of the club. Stop blaming Eddie Howe for every single thing that is wrong in the club. For spending 55 million on Anthony Elanga. Well, what was he supposed to do? He had no sporting director. Would we have preferred it if he just decided, no, that's not my job, I'm not signing anybody? There seems to be a bit of a divide at the club, and I don't see why we can't come together and say, okay, look, It's not going great, but let's go back the boys. Let's make sure that every single home game is an outstanding atmosphere. Every single away game sounds like we've got 20,000 fans in the stadium. We need to do this. We've got to stick together. Let's wrap up with a little bit of a preview on the Man City game. So it looks like Bruno is out, Miley is out, but Botman is in. We're losing 2-0. How do we see the game going? Well, obviously the odds are stacked against us, but that's what I think we should thrive on. You've either got to go for it or stay at home. That's the way I see it. The first 5-10 minutes, we saw what we could do against Liverpool. We did it for 37 minutes. We just didn't use our head. We didn't have a play in the middle of the field to go, hold on a second, we're one up. There's nothing wrong with just pinging the ball around a little bit. Let's give our defense a little bit of cover. Maybe Eddie Howe's going to go with the same formation as he did against PSG. We saw that work really well. The only difference here is that Man City don't need to do anything. They can basically just sit back. They might be resting a couple of players as well, but they obviously don't have a playoff in the Champions League to worry about. And then I wanted to kind of ask this question to you in terms of what we think the priority should be. Now, I would never ever suggest purposely playing an understrength team. But if you look at the winter window that we just had where we chose, in my opinion, not to strengthen the squad, can we afford to be going gung-ho in the League Cup, the FA Cup, the Champions League, and the League? Craig Hope made a very, very good point. If Newcastle are worried about PSR and restrictions and about spending money they don't have in the winter, the best way to do that is by spending some money to give you the best chance of making it into the Champions League. That is the way to attack restrictions, not by being afraid to fail. With that being said, I don't think that Newcastle should play anywhere near their first team against Aston Villa in the FA Cup. Play Aaron Ramsdale, play Visa, play Voltemade, play players who need a bit of form maybe. You've got to give some of the youngsters a chance at left back. We've got some guys who've been sitting on the bench, dying for a first team opportunity. You never know what may come out of it. The other thing is to say in the Champions League first leg at Carabao, you've got to go and spank them 6-love so that in the second leg, we can afford to play a bit of a weaker team. We can't afford to play 13 or 12 players 100% every single game. The players are going to burn out. Let me know what you think about priorities. Is there any chance we can sneak into the top 5 of the Premier League? Or realistically, should we be aiming for Conference and Europa League? Thanks very much for watching. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. And don't forget,